A new draft agreement for the UN climate conference in Glasgow on Friday presses countries to be more ambitious in their plans to tackle global warming. The proposal, drafted on the final day of this year's COP26 conference, retained its core demand for nations to set tougher climate pledges next year. But vulnerable countries said they need a more ambitious deal on financial compensation. To join us now is SABC News correspondent at the conference, Laura Makin-Isherwood. Laura, it would seem to me that the deal walks a very tight rope or a fine line between the demands of both the developed and developing nations.
Yeah, absolutely. And the discussions are still ongoing. They're scheduled to be continuing for another 25 minutes, but we are hearing that they could continue further on simply because it is so contentious. There are so many issues to iron out between developed and developing nations, and trying to find a middle ground that will allow countries to cut their carbon emissions while still allow others to continue in their economic plans domestically is very, very difficult. Of course, the draft agreement that was published this morning, a second draft, was watered down somewhat in the language that was used to do with phasing out fossil fuels and stopping coal use in power stations. We've heard now that Saudi Arabia seem to think that this draft is workable. They were one of the countries that were saying that it wasn't really going to be possible to sign up to that first draft. So now we're just waiting to hear what might be agreed and waiting for these nations to come out of these talks and let us know.
Part of what those countries are hanging on to is the agreement to a deal of 1.5 degrees Celsius. But I believe now it's been spoken about in terms of different countries' national context. Could this be something that sways it away from this target?
Yeah, and that 1.5 degree target was always what this summit was about trying to achieve. That was one of the main goals, and we know that the UK presidency were really focusing on it, asking leaders to call their negotiator teams and pull out all the stops effectively in the last couple of days to try to make that target possible. We heard from the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, though, who said that that 1.5 dream was on life support. And SABC News has spoken to the Secretary General of the Commonwealth, Baroness Scotland, and she said that it's not looking that likely, to be honest, and she says that anything beyond 1.5 degrees could actually be really devastating for many of the Commonwealth's member states. Some will lose their lives, their livelihoods. It will increase desertification across the sub-Saharan continent as well. So it's really imperative that countries continue to try to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, their reduction in carbon dioxide levels that they are producing too, and continue to come back year on year now. That's a decision that has been made, we know, coming back year on year to redefine those commitments and accelerate what they're doing to try to move towards that 1.5 degree goal.
So I believe one of the analyst specialists there, Grant Ward from Grantham Institute, is saying that all of the subsidies on fossil fuels are inefficient. So just how tough are the talks getting on financing?
Really difficult, and this is another big thing that's run throughout the entirety of this summit and the last 2 weeks, is the fact that money ultimately plays into the decisions that different countries make. If they don't have the finances available to move away from using fossil fuels and instigate new infrastructure essentially that will allow renewable technology to be used, or even that they have the money available to start mitigation projects that would allow countries to deal with the impacts of climate change that they're already facing, then that is going to be a real struggle. And domestically in country, many governments are focusing on their own economies, and if decisions made are not going to allow for continued growth, it might affect their workforce, then obviously that's going to be a bone of contention for them, particularly when they're looking to continue their leadership in country and offer what their electorate might want. But ultimately, many are saying that we have to think about the bigger picture now. Many leaders that are in power right now may not be in power in 5 years, 10 years' time, but the climate issue is going to continue. So decisions made today are really going to be important as to how the world and our future generations have to behave and what our lives actually are like.
Laura, thank you very much. SABC correspondent at those talks, which she says are winding down any minute now in the next 15 minutes or so.